to watch that video. Amen. Well, we're so glad you're here today. Let's take a moment. Let's welcome all of our locations and all those who watch online. Thanks for joining us. And before we dive in, I know my family will be watching this. Yesterday, we said goodbye to my grandmother, and I love you all, family, and thanks for a great day yesterday. Also, my grandmother attended the block as much as she could and contributed as much as she could, and really played a special part in helping us start the church and all that good stuff. So she came to Port Richmond, that location, quite a bit. And then when the Northeast started, would come there to the 12 o'clock occasionally when she could. But anyway, we had a great day celebrating my grandmother's life. But anyway, I just want to let you guys know that, and family who are watching, I love you all very much. And I get to do this because I'm in charge. So anyway. But it was a beautiful day. Before we continue, let me give you one quick thing. Next week, everybody say next week, every location, next week. We will not be gathering in the mornings or in Center City in the evening necessarily. We are going to do what we're calling halftime. And we're trying to, twice a year, take 2 weekends a year off from gathering to give our incredible, amazing volunteers a rest. And also just to recalibrate, it's a great time to spend with family. Even go support another local church in Philadelphia or somewhere else or whatever it is. So we will not be gathering in the morning next week. Do not show up. Nobody will be at your location or in Center City in the evening. They won't be there. But also, we'll put out on online a brief message I share about halftime. And then at night, everybody say Sunday night. We'll be gathering in our Northeast location for a worship night. So we would love for you to join us, bring a friend. We'll be gathering Sunday night in the Northeast, 6 p.m. for a worship night. Everybody got that? If you do, say yes. All right. So that's next week. Well, without further ado, I would love to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Tiffany Brown in the house. And Dr. Brown is going to share a little bit about herself, but we are completing our series, Salty. And has it been a good series for you? Have you been blessed and encouraged? So I felt like this was a great way to conclude this series, particularly with a psychologist, somebody who's a lot smarter than me, and just to really get into the mental and the emotional and even the physical implications of carrying offense. But before we get into all the good stuff, I'd love to just ask you a few questions. Firstly, just tell us about yourself, what you do, and really how you became a psychologist or why.
So my name is Dr. Tiffany Brown, and call me Tiffany, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in the area. How I became a psychologist, no one actually believes this, but I did not plan to be a psychologist. I was in school. I liked studying psychology. I was awful at biology. Originally, I wanted to be a medical doctor. I couldn't do chemistry. I was really, really bad at it. So I just kept going. It wasn't a thought of like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor one day. I literally just kept going and then ended up in a PhD program.
Come on now. You know, that's how I became a preacher as well. I wasn't good at anything else. So here I am. Anyway, that's great. Okay, so you're a psychologist. Can you tell us something like the funniest or kind of like the craziest thing that's ever happened to you as you were counseling somebody?
I mean, the crazy things I can't talk about, but the one of the funniest things that I often see, and this is actually something that happened to someone I know, she was offended with her therapist. So rather than talking about it, what she did was she started showing up to therapy late. So at some point I said to her, I was like, you know you're paying for that, right? Like every minute that you are late to, you still have to pay for it. But the funny thing is that's what we do. When we get offended and we can't talk about things, you start acting out. So she started acting out.
Wow, I don't got that kind of money. I'm just telling you right now. Like that's a lot of work to be that salty, to be late to your therapist, just to show your therapist that you're mad at your therapist and then pay for it. Because you know the therapist is going to charge you full price, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, wow, that's some deep stuff right there. At least they knew they needed to go to counseling.
Right, very true.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty funny. All right, so real quick, and we're going to really get into some good stuff. But why do you go to our Center City location?
I do.
You attend faithfully. You live nearby. Why do you attend TBC? What drew you to the Block Church?
So what I love most is you have such a heart for people, and you can actually feel that. And you're so transparent. So it makes me feel like I don't have to fake. I don't have to be inauthentic. I don't have to act like I don't have problems. I don't have mess. Because you're so honest with yours, and it's so refreshing. I love that. So that's what keeps me coming.
That's encouraging. I remember a conversation you and I had after a message. I had talked about my need to go to therapy, and you came up to me, and we hadn't met really yet, and you were like, yeah, you know, I'm a therapist, and like, I've never heard a preacher say that he goes to or needs to go to therapy, and I was like, well, I don't know, like, we all gotta go, like, if, like I'm telling you, man. But anyway, that was encouraging to me, and it's baffling to me that people aren't more honest about just the fact that we all need help, you know? It's just so crazy. And maybe like even the generation before me, even our pastors, like it was not, you had to act like you were perfect.
Right.
You know? I don't know if you experienced that, been in church before or had an experience in that way, but like, I mean, that was what you did as a pastor, you know, maybe a generation before, you just were like, nothing bothers me, I can handle it. I'm not saying all, but at least I kind of grew up in that thought process. But I don't know about you, but I think our world's changing and our culture's changing.
Definitely.
And like, we just can't play that anymore, right?
Right.
So anyway, all right. So one more little, piece, and then let's dive into the good stuff. But what has been your favorite part of this series, Salty?
I think it was Pastor Derek's story about when he was on the train. I loved that story. It was so real, and we all have moments that we are terribly ashamed of.
Well, tell us what he did, because not every location got that, because he was just preaching in Center City. What happened?
So basically, he was on the train, and he had already paid, or he overpaid, and the conductor was trying to get him off the train, and he wouldn't, basically, he just got into it with them, and he would not back down. And so then the conductor called the police, right? And he was like, call him. Let's do this, you know?
That was from, I think, week 2, The Problem with Petty, right? Yeah, and he said he put his foot down, you know, and he made, this is so funny, he made the whole train wait at an extended period of time. This is Center City's location, Pastor, by the way. See why we all need therapy, you know what I mean? That's pretty funny. Okay,
Yeah,
I forgot
great.
about that. So I know that, you know, that was a funny moment. He was using that as a springboard to illustrate, but was there anything meaningful spiritually or even emotionally that stood out to you in this series that maybe everybody should kind of remember? Can you think of something?
Yeah, what was so important to me about that story was his willingness to share an experience that he was ashamed of. Just willing to talk about it, you know, because sometimes when we experience shame like that, what we do is we keep it in. It's something to be embarrassed about, but that's not what we should do with shame. We should get it out, we should talk about it, so then we can deal with it. And he was willing to talk to himself and be like, what's the root of this? Why am I acting like this? I loved that.
Would you say that shame is such a massive indicator of like, man, there's something going on the inside?
Oh yeah, shame is a deep-rooted emotion. It's not something you start feeling at the surface level one day. It's something that's deeply rooted that you have to really begin to understand, why am I feeling this way? It's a deep feeling.
What happens to people like that that are like full of shame? Like, what are some just things that you like, you know, man, there's shame there and I didn't realize it?
There's so many things. They self-sabotage. What that means is they get in their way. And what's really funny is sometimes we think, well, God's delaying me. Something is happening spiritually. But sometimes it's just shame and you getting in your own way of you being able to get what you want and able to get the things that you want. Because that's what happens when we feel deeply shamed or we feel deeply embarrassed about ourselves. We hang ourselves up. We trip ourselves.
And like, I guess like, and we're not even fully going in the shame route today, but like, would pride really be a root of that? Like, I mean, doesn't it just, I mean, I don't know. It feels like it's the root of everything, you know? But anyway, so, but I think like that language pride or that word pride, I mean, it really leads to offense.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I wanna kind of theme this conversation today, a salty state of mind. All right, a salty state of mind as we're talking about the psychological, the emotional, the physical effects of being offended. That's what our series has been about, offense, being offended, staying offended. And I think we would both agree that you're going to get offended at some point. Do you guys agree with that? Okay, but what do we do? Like, how do we overcome this? And like, more importantly, like what happens to us if we don't? And so I want to read a couple scriptures to give us like a framework, and then we'll kind of dive into some stuff that will illuminate some things. But firstly, I love Proverbs, and you recommended this scripture, Proverbs 4:7. You said this is like your favorite scripture.
It is.
It's kind of like your counseling kind of like main thought here. But the Bible says this, says the beginning of wisdom is, and I'm using the Amplified, it's for us to get skillful and godly wisdom, it is preeminent. And with all you're acquiring, get understanding, which means actively seek spiritual discernment and mature comprehension and logical interpretation. Mm-hmm. Isn't that beautiful? So in other words, like the best thing that you can do for yourself and your life is pursue understanding of your own issues and inadequacies. I mean, that's essentially what it's saying.
Right.
And then we jump over to Philippians 4:8, and Paul says, finally, believers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable and worthy of respect, whatever is right and confirmed by God's word, whatever is pure and wholesome, whatever is lovely and brings peace, whatever is admirable and of good repute, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think continually. Everybody say continually. Continually on these things. Center your mind on them and implant them in your heart. Would you say that would be a good counseling strategy?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, this is what we're doing as we're walking through psychology and counseling. I mean, basically, you're getting a free counseling session today. You're welcome, okay? Like that's what counseling is. That's what therapy is. Would you say it's a pursuit of wisdom and understanding of your issues, and then it's centering your mind and your emotions on the right things rather than wallowing in the wrong things.
Exactly.
And sometimes you got to go back to the painful things and the shameful things and frame them properly so that you can get to the right things. Right? So that's our goal. That's what we're going to do today, a salty state of mind. Let's continue. All right, what are some psychological or emotional effects of harboring offense?
So harboring offense can lead to quite a few things: depression, anxiety, issues with your self-esteem. And typically, not always, but typically how this works is people start ruminating. And what we mean by ruminating is thinking things over and over and over again. My mother would say it's chewing the cud. It's kind of gross, but that's how she frames it. And it's not productive. It doesn't lead to a solution. It doesn't help us figure out anything. It's just stewing. And when you stew like that, I hope everyone has noticed this within their own lives, what happens is you end up on a downward spiral. You always end up in a bad place. And when you end up in that bad place, that's when you start feeling depressed. That's when you start feeling more anxious. You start feeling bad about yourself.
So to dive into that a little bit more, ruminating, dive into like what happens to you emotionally and psychologically, like as you harbor it, like what are some spin-offs of those things? You talk about depression, anxiety, spiraling downward. What happens? Give me an example, even like when, or a situation where someone is doing that, what happens to them?
Okay, so hopefully everyone can relate to this. Somebody makes you mad, right? So you get mad and say you didn't respond in that moment. So you go home and you're like, I wish I would have said this. Next time I'm gonna say this. So you're already in the past or you're in the future. You're not present with where you are, okay? So that's where it starts. And then the next moment is, well, why didn't I say this? Next moment is, why am I so weak? What is so wrong with me? Or it goes, What's so wrong with that person? Why are they so evil? You start demonizing them. But then it becomes so exaggerated and so distorted. And now you're having this whole conversation in your mind that's not even real. It's all going on here. So those are the processes that lead to depression, anxiety, you're feeling awful about yourself, or you start to develop themes about other people you can't trust, people are constantly disappointing. But it's all starting in your mind.
Well, and that's really good. So like let me say this. Like sometimes I'll make up stuff and I'll come to conclusions for people before the actual conclusion.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody do that? Anybody? Okay. Good. I'm glad it's not just me. Like, that's a horrible thing to do.
We all distort reality. We all do it.
And like, when you are offended, or when you have a proclivity or a natural tendency to be offended, like, would you say that that is like you're already drawing conclusions?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, do you find that in your counseling that people draw conclusions way too often?
All the time. All the time. We have this term called projection. And projection is when you're putting something onto other people. We do it, everyone, we do it all the time. And oftentimes it's based off of these narratives that we formed. So if you have this thought about yourself of like, you know, I'm not good enough, I never feel good enough. So then you start to believe that other people are treating you like you're not good enough. And the reality is it's coming from you, but it starts to feel like it's coming from the outside world.
Jeez. Whew. Do I have to pay for you for the next session? Getting set free out here. Okay, long term. It's you though. It's not me. Okay. It's you. Long term, emotionally, psychologically. What begins to break down? Let's go medically for a moment. Could you talk about that? And you got to be mature today. You kind of got to lean in. Like this is a heady intellectual conversation that we're having. Like, what happens? Like, could your psychological breakdown affect literally your brain? I mean, what are some things that happen?
It can affect your brain, your body. But what it's important to remember is when we are offended or when we're experiencing these different emotional experiences, how do we behave as a result of that? So we lose sleep. Our body is stressed, and when your body is stressed, that can lead to physical illness. We overeat, we undereat. People are more likely to use substances. You know, they get, I don't want to say lazy, but you become less physically active. So these are the things that we do in response to experiencing offense. And those things can lead to people being sick, heart disease, all type of diseases.
You're telling me heart disease could be an effect potentially of offense?
Cardiovascular disease, definitely. Holding stress within your body. Stress is terrible. It is awful for the mind. It's awful for the body. It can definitely lead to heart disease.
Is there a difference between good stress and bad stress?
You know, I don't say that. I get that people say that sometimes like when you're nervous, you get the release of endorphins. So sure, but stress overall is bad for the body. It's bad.
Can we come back to that? Can you teach me how to be stress-free? I need to learn that. Okay, all right, let's move on. So what would be some relational effects of carrying offense? So like horizontally, you know, or even with your parents or something like that. Like, what would be some relational effects?
Okay, so one point is it's important to remember, and I was saying this earlier in the example, that when you don't communicate and when you hold in offense, you're going to act it out. I mean, anything that is inside of you, it's going to come out. That's just how it works. So when you're acting out, it impacts your relationship with yourself, it impacts your relationship with other people, it impacts your relationship with God. So what can happen is it gets really interesting, right? When you start to distort reality, right? So then you start to isolate because you're feeling like, I don't really want to be around people. People are constantly hurting me. So then you're isolating. So you're removing yourself from relationships. Another thing that happens, and hopefully everyone can relate to this, is you take the side of your offense. So now it's me and my offense against you. And whenever we are in meaningful relationships, we don't want to do that. If I know that I'm meant to be connected to a person, I don't want to be against them, me and my offense against you, because then somebody has to win. And if somebody's winning, somebody's losing, so it's not good. So you want to try to take the perspective of me and this person against the offense. Help me work on this. Help me understand what happened.
That is such a great, like, reframing of, like, I don't know if I've ever heard it that way. Okay. Like, instead of, arguing with my spouse, so to speak, about, hey, this issue that you did is offending me, what we've got to do is we've got to reframe that and say, we've got to fight this issue together.
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
That is so good. I've not thought of it like that.
Yeah.
Why didn't nobody tell me that before? My premarital counseling, they didn't tell me that. Okay, wow, that's really helpful. And then, you know what I've noticed in our culture a lot of times is like, we pick up other people's offenses
all the time.
that, like, are, like, it's not my business. You know what I'm saying? And, like, one of people's favorite thing to say is, like, mind your business. This is my life, my truth. But, like, you're out here picking up other people's offenses. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's like contagious. You know, anxiety can be contagious as well. You've ever been around someone anxious and all of a sudden you start feeling anxious and you're like, I don't think that belongs to me. But I mean, feelings can be contagious, and so are offenses. You just, you want to be in relationship with people, you want to relate, so the next thing you know, what they're putting out, you're picking up.
The devil.
The devil.
Well, okay, let's talk about anxiety a little bit for a second, because a lot of times, I mean, anxiety can be circumstantial, where it's like, I'm worried, can I pay my bills? Or I'm worried, am I going to get the promotion? But, like, a lot of times too, like, we get anxious about, like, relationships not working out. Right. Or anxious that I'm single, or anxious that I'm waiting, or anxious that nobody likes me, or did I say the wrong thing in the wrong meeting? And is there explain the difference firstly between anxiety and depression. Could you break those down for a moment?
So there's a lot of different theories on this, so a lot of people would say different things about it. Some people would say that it's the opposite side of the same coin. That's one way of thinking about it. Other people would say that anxiety is being too focused on the future, whereas depression is being too focused on the past. So if you're ruminating, you're overthinking about what's going to happen in a year, how am I going to get here in a year, what's this person going to say to me in a year, that's anxiety. But if you're in the past and you're thinking about, wow, it was really hurtful when this person said this 5 years ago, or it was really hurtful when this happened, then that's depression.
And so, like, when we're experiencing these sort of things, like, if I were sitting with you and you would determine, okay, you're not depressed, you're overly anxious, what would be some steps, that, like, and you're noticing that, like, I really have some offense issues or whatever, like, what would you tell me, particularly in regards to some of my relationships?
I would tell you to try to stay present. So don't go back, don't go forward, try to stay present. So what can you do in the moment that's gonna help? What can you be working on in the moment? Because in reality, we don't know what's gonna happen. We have no idea.
I want to talk about staying present for a moment, because I think in our culture, it feels like we're so rarely present.
Right.
I'm not putting that on everybody, okay? But, like, particularly my generation, like, I'm addicted to my telephone, my cell phone, whatever it's called, and my computer, my device, my whatever, like, my friend that lives in my pocket, I'm, you just kind of, like, you're always going to the back pocket to pull it out, and, like, it's hard to stay present. I'm having a conversation, but I'm thinking about my emails, or I'm thinking about social media, or I'm thinking about, it's like all the things going on. We're so connected. And I was talking to a pastor last night. He's no longer a senior pastor. He's retired from that. He's doing something else. And he was talking about how, like, he struggled to stay when he would go on vacation, okay? Because summertime, families going on vacation. He's like, I struggled, 15 years ago, when I was going on vacation to shut down. And it would affect my family. Like, my wife would get offended, or my family or my kids would be offended that I wasn't present. And I was just thinking to myself, like, bro, if you struggled with that 15 years ago when you did not have a smartphone or social media or emails coming to your phone, like, we're up against it today.
Oh, yeah.
What do we do about that? Give me some tips on staying present so that I don't offend or hurt, the people who love me, particularly when I need to shut down and de-stress. Because you talk about stress being bad, and like for me to de-stress, I gotta detach. Come on, somebody, that'll preach right there. It's like, sometimes you gotta do that. That just came to me, one in my notes. So like, how do I do that so that I am not offensive to others and that I don't offend my body even?
Right. So I think that we have to learn to value being present, because there's a loss of value in it. But if you think about it, it feels so much better to just be where you are, to just be with people. But for some reason, we've gotten so used to being disconnected that it has more appeal than actually being present. But being present, it feels so much better. Real relationships are so much better than social media relationships. They're real. So I think that the first thing is value being present. It's like teaching everybody so that, remember, it's better. It feels better. It's better for your body. It's better for your psyche. It's better for you physiologically to just be with people.
How would if I got my phone, my emails, all that kind of stuff, what are some practical ways? Even like, are there breathing techniques? Are there some things that like I could practice? Well, maybe like someone else. I'm perfect, but like if there were other people that would need to know how to practice, just shutting down. Like, I mean, obviously I can turn off my cell phone, but I can't forever. I got a kid, I got to check in, make sure my kid's alive. You know what I'm saying? Like, what do I do? You have anything practical that I can do?
I do. This is, now other people may not be able to do this, but something that I do not have notifications on my phone. They are turned off. So I check my phone when I want to check my phone. Like when text messages come in, I don't even know it. I don't like it. I didn't like feeling hostage to my phone. I didn't like the feeling that people can get in contact with me at any moment. So I turned the notifications off, and it has been heavenly. Absolutely wonderful.
What about breathing or thinking or even like sometimes, hold on. But listen, sometimes Christians might be like against meditating per se, and I want to break that up for a second. Like, I don't mean like going into some weird Zen where you're like tapping into some odd spiritual, whatever, right? Like, I'm not talking about like, any of those things, but like, is there a healthy practice of stillness and silence and quiet and breathing that, obviously I'm still focused on the cross and so forth. I want to be clear about that so I get no emails, right? But like, you know what I'm saying?
I do. So, I mean, deep breathing is always good. So what you're doing is you're deeply breathing in, and wherever you feel stressed in your body, you send the breath to that part of your body. Always good. You can do that at any point in the day when you're feeling overwhelmed. Another thing is calming your mind. So it's trying to get yourself to not think about things. And when thoughts come up, what you do is you allow them to pass by, but you don't chase them. So you're just sitting presently with yourself. Whatever comes up, it comes up. You don't judge it. You just let it pass you by.
And when Paul says, be anxious for nothing, right? I mean, it's like, I'm not chasing that.
Don't chase it.
That's good. All right, let's move on. Couple quick things. What are some physical effects to staying offended? I mean, some real physiological effects. Like, what happens? I know we touched on that a little bit, but like, is there more there?
I think that the main thing to remember is when you are offended, it does impact your body. You are holding that inside of you. So if you think about anything that you're holding in, it's going to start to do stuff. And so that's when you start seeing the heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, all of that stuff. In research, there's a correlation. So we don't talk about things causing that because, the mechanisms that cause things we're still figuring out. But there's a relationship between holding in stress, holding in offense, and heart disease.
So then let's conclude our time by talking about practical, maybe clinical ways, if you will, of like dealing with this stuff. How do I, if I'm if I'm holding this, like, man, how do I let go of offense? What do I do? Conclude this series. Help us overcome, because offense is coming.
Right, definitely.
You know, like, you're gonna be salty about something.
Definitely.
What do we do? How do we win? How do we be victorious?
So what you want to try to do is nip it in the bud before it takes root. The moment you start to feel whatever you're feeling, some people get angry, some people get anxious, and you feel that surge of emotion. As soon as you feel it, address it. And so that's saying to a person, can you help me understand what you meant? I don't want to misunderstand. But it's being vulnerable enough to say that. And not be, not get defensive, not be concerned about their response, but you're taking care of yourself and you're taking care of that relationship. So it's saying, do you mind if we just revisit that? I need to better understand that. Another thing. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think that's a great strategy. Like, I'm bad at this. I want to accuse rather than include.
Right, exactly.
And like, so my I want to be like, you did this, and whatever. But like, man, what you said earlier changed my life. Like, that's why I came to church today. Like, I need to include you in the process.
Yes.
Before I accuse you
Right.
for being the culprit.
Right.
Dang.
That was really good.
Yeah.
I like that.
I have a side counseling practice, and I'm only $300 an hour, but, All right, I was just kidding. Okay, yeah, keep going.
Other things that you want to do is be aware, and this is something, it's all a process, it all takes time, but be aware of what your narratives are. Do you often feel like this? So start to ask yourself, do I often feel angry when people do this? Or do I often think that I'm weak? Or what are the narratives that run in your mind about yourself? Because what will happen is we'll think that other people are treating us like that, but once again, it's all coming from within.
All right, so any other steps before we go?
Another question that's good. Does this person remind me of someone else? Have I felt this before? Because I don't know if you've ever noticed, but people will touch that button just like somebody else did 5 years ago. And you're responding to them in this amplified, exaggerated way, and you don't even know why. They're like, wow, that was really out of line. That doesn't quite fit the situation, but it's really about somebody else.
And like, it's not fair to treat
No.
somebody new like somebody old.
No.
And like,
No.
that might be why some people stay single.
Right. It's weird, too.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit the context. So when someone's doing something that doesn't fit the context, you're like, whoa, what's that about?
So, do you, do we have patterns that, like, we can acknowledge quickly? Like how do you know, man, I'm in this pattern of offense, and how do I just acknowledge it before it goes too far?
So it's recognizing that, first off, we all have patterns. We all end up in what we call like these historical things, right? So it's recognizing that I've been here before. It's like when you're like for the single people, you end up in the same relationship over and over and over again. So when you're starting to see those same relationships or the same way of being over and over and over again, you know you're in a pattern.
Any other questions that we should answer for people that they might be thinking about before we go?
I think one of the most important things that I think for people to remember is, remember what is inside is going to come out, inevitably. So we have to communicate and we have to get hold of things before they take root. Because you're gonna act it out, and when you act it out, you're gonna ruin relationships. It's not gonna be done on purpose, it's just gonna happen, or you're gonna feel terrible about yourself. So we have to be willing to communicate with people, engage people, so that we all can feel better.
Is it too late? If somebody's been offended for 10 years, is it too late?
It's never too late. It's never too late. It takes time, but it's never too late.
Can you fix relationships that have been broken over offense, that have been broken for years and years and years and years?
If you're willing to work.
What does that work look like?
It means talking, it means processing, it means being real, being vulnerable, not being defensive. If you're willing to work, work will work. Work will work.
Yeah, that's good. Defensiveness. I want to close with this. People are constantly defensive because they're perpetually offended.
Right.
And how do we stop ourselves from being defensive, even in the simplest forms? Do you have any thoughts around that?
How do we
Stop ourselves from being defensive? Because that is like a natural response so often.
It's very difficult, but it's willing to be vulnerable. And when you're in close relationship with people, you can even say to them, I'm scared to talk about this because typically people respond to me quite negatively. Is it okay? Is it safe for me to be able to talk about this with you? See how they respond. If they say yes, trust them. And you don't dive all the way in. You don't start off swimming in 16 feet water. Start off in the shallow end. Test it. And then once you get more comfortable, you go deeper and you go deeper.
That's really good. I don't want to be defensive. Yeah. And I can be a lot of times. People might comment about something, or I'll get an email, and like my first inclination is like to be defensive, and I think the longer I say defensive, the more offended I become.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And I want to be wise, and that's what Proverbs says. It's like seek understanding. And like if I put the guard above defensiveness, I can't understand the value. Even if there's some meat, but there's a lot of bones, there's still some meat in there somewhere.
Oh, yeah. And defensiveness is an attempt to protect yourself. We do have to remember it's an attempt to protect yourself. But as you're protecting yourself, you're ruining other relationships. So you have to find a way to still, make sure you're okay, but be willing to have other relationships.
That's good. Hey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I would say that this was just the opening of the can, in a lot of areas. But if somebody wanted to follow up with you and needed counseling, or first of all, I recommend everybody gets counseling at some point in their life. But if they wanted to connect with you, how would they do that?
They can email me. I think my Dr. Tiffany Brown at gmail.com. If you're looking for a psychologist and you're not in the area, Psychology Today, they have a bunch of profiles of different psychologists. What you want to do is you want to contact a few different people, see who have openings, see who you like. When you're looking for a psychologist, see who feels good to you, whose thinking is similar to your thinking. If people are processing similar to how you process. But see who feels good. That's important.
Good. Hey, let's I want to pray for everybody, and I would love it if we just closed our time together. And I would love it if you'd be willing to. Would you pray over our church, and would you be okay with that? I put you on the spot. I would love it if at all locations you would stand to your feet.